I am exhausted. I am exhausted of constantly, every single day, having to explain to people who have apparently read and are obsessed with these books that Tamlin never sold out her sisters. That Tamlin did not go to Hybern to get her back as his pretty wife. That Tamlin did not try to break their maid bond. If you have read the books, you should at least comprehend what you're reading, because there are more than 4 different quotes there, and there's more than 4, but there are at least 4 different quotes in ACOTAR alone that tell you that he was playing a game just like you people say that Rhys was under the mountain. It was his mask so he could remain a spy at Hybern and gather intel for the war. What excuse was he going to tell Hybern to get him to believe that he was actually on his side? What's the one thing that everyone would actually believe that would make him look like he was on Hybern's side? That he wanted Feyre back. Absolutely. So he used that to convince... I don't have the books in front of me right now because clearly I'm at work, but let's go through some of it. So people say that Tamlin sold out her sisters. So we have, first and foremost, we have Mor telling Amren that Ianthe backstabbed Tamlin and got her sisters thrown into the cauldron. Blah, blah, blah. And then we have Rhys saying Ianthe went behind Tamlin's back and there was nothing we could do. And then we have Feyre herself, when she's in the Spring Court, which is a whole other thing that I need to discuss, saying that I'm gonna kill Ianthe and Jurian for this, for what they did to us. Ianthe and Jurian, that's who she blamed, not Tamlin. Because in the actual scene, I don't know if you guys have heard the graphic audio, but in the graphic audio, you can actually hear Tamlin in the background going, "What?" as they're brought out. So he had no idea. Secondly, saying that he wanted to force her back. No. He was wearing a mask. So yes, he reached for her. Obviously, he knew as a high fae she could winnow. She winnowed away. But she had to play victim to get him to take her back, remember? And similar to Eris and how he's only a dick in front of, like, his brothers or his father's guards, Tamlin was, like, reaching for her and being a dick in front of Hybern. It's part of his plan. If Hybern kicked him out or tried to kill him, he wouldn't have been able to help the courts in the war. So he had to think on his feet here. So I don't blame him for that. Secondly, people that say, like, he was definitely going to force her back. Like, he forced her back and that's why she destroyed his court. She made him a promise that if he forced her back, she was going to destroy his court. Show me the scene where he forces her back. Because that never happened. Feyre actually has to play Rhys's victim to get him to take her back. Yes, it was because the wards were down and she had a chance for her family to flee to safety. That's why she did it, and I get that. But she still played on his fears for her, because at this time, every single person in Prythian still believed that Rhys was a torturer and that his court was a court of nightmares. That is the context here. Nobody knew about Valaris, so he was terrified that Feyre was actually being mind-fucked by Rhys, which is valid here. It is valid. I wasn't going to keep going, but now that I'm on my rant, I'm just going to say everything that's on my mind. So, Tamlin takes her back to the Spring Court, believing that she's been mind-fucked by Rhys, and then we get Feyre automatically beginning her plan to destroy him, to twist the narratives of everything that happens to make his court and his citizens believe that he's a bad person and a bad High Lord, which has never happened because he has done everything for his court. Even when he tells Feyre that he had made the bargain with Hybern to spare his court from being killed and, like, probably raped and stuff, just like Hybern did to the other temples and stuff, Feyre's like, oh, well, you know, at least he thought about, like, how his people would be affected, and that's why he did this. That was the point of the Hybern bargain. Not getting Feyre back, but sparing his people from more pain. They were still rebuilding and still traumatized from under the mountain, which a lot of people forget this part. When she and Lucien originally in Akamath go to the villages, he mentions that the Spring Court people were in cages and forced to become cannibals. So they are still traumatized right now. But anyway, Feyre makes mention that he did the bargain to spare his people, which was, as I said, the whole point of the bargain, not to get her back. He only used that as an excuse so that Hybern would believe that he was actually on his side. Tamlin even says at the meeting, I was trying to find a way around that. So he was trying to find a way around taking her back, or like having Hybern pretend to break the mate bond, which, as we know, was only the bargain, because you can't actually break a mate bond. But Tamlin fully admits and tells her, it wasn't about that, I just had to use that, I meant to find a way around that. And then we have Feyre saying, she's pushing him and pushing him and pushing him, wanting him to explode. And then he explodes. And then she lets it hit her, lets it hurt her in front of people so that they see it. That was 1. 2, the sentry thing with Ianthe. That wasn't even Tamlin's fault, because Feyre said she had mind-fucked Ianthe, figured out what she was going to do, and then goaded her into it. And then she played hero. Feyre also says in her little monologue when she first comes back to Spring that Tamlin has this whole monologue where he tells her, like I said, about how the bargain was to spare his people and how they have to enforce the Western Wall. And what Feyre got from that was, okay, so the Western Wall is the weakest. That's where Hybern is going to strike, so I'm going to help weaken it further to help them invade. To destroy and trample the Spring Court. Which, it must be real nice to put your pettiness over innocent people's lives who are already traumatized, just the way you were. But moving on, so she goes along with her plan, and then Tamlin is going along with his plan, and he doesn't fully trust her, so he doesn't let her in on the fact that he's a spy, which I totally get, not fully trusting her if he still thinks she was mindfucked by Rhys. And then he, introduces Hybern's niece and nephew, Branna and Dagden, who we know are super evil. And Feyre was mad that he wasn't doing anything about their evil acts and when they killed the children of the Blessed and all of this stuff. And you have to remember that if Tamlin did anything against Hybern, he wouldn't be let back in to gather intel to help the courts win. So anyway, all that shit goes down with Branna and Dagden and Ianthe, which, again, Tamlin was smart not to turn on because he knew that she was now an ally to Hybern and that she would tattle to him if he went against her. Because going against her at this point is going against Hybern. So it's not that he trusted Ianthe still. It's not that he was blowing off all the shit that she was doing. It's him using a strategy so that it would work for them in the end. When Lucien and Feyre kill Branna and Dagden, and then, Feyre saves him from Ianthe, and all that happens, and they leave. Lucien literally says to her, it was either go to war with Hybern and the Night Court to get her back, because they thought that she was being tortured, or ally with Hybern and use it to our advantage to help the courts later on. He says this to her. So he kind of outs the whole plan, but Feyre, being Feyre, is still stuck in her pettiness and is just like, hey, I destroyed Spring. Whatever. She's stupid at this point, but whatever. And then they leave, and she doesn't think of any of the consequences of her actions until the meeting. Not even to mention about that thing with Ianthe that I know that, like, Lucien was in on the plan at this point. And I get it. And I know that he only left so that he could see Elaine. But why wouldn't he have ever told Tamlin about Ianthe's whole, what do you call it, like, whole evilness? Like, before ACOTAR. Why didn't he or Feyre ever tell him, like, she's a predator, like, she's been after Lucien, she's been after me for this long? Like, if anyone would understand that, it would be Tamlin, because he was preyed on by Amarantha. Like, he would have understood that, and they could have gotten rid of Ianthe so much sooner. I don't know whether it was out of pride or embarrassment, but Lucien never, like, tells him what happened. He never tells him that he was tricked into being with her on Calanmai. He never tells him that, like, Ianthe's been preying on him for ages. He never, as far as we know, he never tells him that she tried to rape him. And it just blows my mind, because if anyone was going to understand this, it would be Tamlin. I hate that so much, but that was just a little aside. Next video, on to part 9, going back to the actual plot. Also, Alice wasn't in on the plan because she was just, like, a Spring Court citizen. Well, citizen at this point. So, the way that SJM kind of changed her to be, like, loyal to Tamlin, and then just, like, oh, here, Feyre, go screw him over when we're in the midst of a upcoming war. Like, that didn't sit well with me. But I do like Alice as a character. I was sad that we never saw her again. And yeah, so then the High Lords meeting happens. We know what happens there. Tamlin shows up, and basically there's fighting. Then he mentions that he did all of this to be a spy for Hybern. This is when he tells everybody. And, of course, nobody believes him, which is weird, because they all had a meeting with Tamlin under the mountain, and Rhys fled. But suddenly they're all on Rhys's side and chummy with him. That didn't sit well with me. But, anyway, they question him. He waves his hand, and pages upon pages upon pages of intel that he's gathered at Hybern show up. Helion reads them and tells everybody that he is valid. Tamlin's actually the one that told Lucien about the huge collection of Fabian weapons that Hybern had. Lucien told Nuon, and Nuon made the antidote. So if Tamlin had been killed or kicked out by Hybern, by outing himself at any point during any of this, he would not have known about the Fabian weapons, and that alone could have gotten way more people killed. So there was that, and then he also knew the first 2 places that Hybern was going to strike, and where he was going to be sending his least trained warriors. So he showed up with not only pages of intel, not only the information about Fabian weapons, but also information about where they were going to hit and when, which makes his whole strategy and plan very valid. Despite losing smaller battles, like having to cater to Ianthe, having to cater to Branna and Dagden for a time, I understand why he didn't trust Feyre with the information on his plan, because, again, he thought she was mind-fucked or controlled by Rhys. So I do get that, but I do think at the same time, her not knowing that, maybe she would have stopped her plan of destroying Spring. Maybe. She is a very petty, annoying person, so maybe she wouldn't have, but maybe she would have. Who knows? But then, Then Feyre admits everything that she did. In her head, of course, because she wasn't going to admit any faults out loud when Tamlin basically said, like, you delighted in, like, shredding my court apart. And people's homes are now cinders because of you. And in her head, she's like, oh, the guilt, all those lands and people I've laid bare to Hybern. She admitted it, okay? She admitted it. And then, of course, she feels guilty, and Rhys is just like, don't feel guilty, and then all of a sudden her guilt is taken away, which should not have happened. But she then admits, well, I kind of fucked myself over here and everyone else by destroying his entire army that we're actually gonna need for the war. Too bad, so sad, we're down an army, don't know what we're gonna do about that one, because I can't fix it. What can she ever fix? And Tamlin goes on his tangent and gets all mad, which is justifiable. I don't give a flying fuck what he said about Feyre's sex noises, okay? Getting his people killed is worse. I don't care. Actions speak louder than words to me. I could not give two shits that he insulted her. She deserved it. And it's not slut-shaming, because he wasn't saying it about sleeping around. And then, of course, we have all of the fights and the comments from Baron. Baron, and then Callias, and then Tarquin and Varian, and all of those people questioning Rhys, which I loved, because, like, abso-fucking-lutely question this dickhead, please. Like, you were all allied with Tamlin, had a meeting with him after Amarantha was killed under the mountain when Rhys fled like a coward. And now you're all on Rhys's side? Like, it doesn't make sense to me, but whatever. Anyway, they all realize that Tamlin's telling the truth. And then, of course, we have, after the fact, Tarquin and the blood rubies kind of happening at the same time. Not at the same time, but kind of at the same time. We have them helping the summer court with their battle with Hybern, the first one, and Tarquin basically yelling at Feyre about how she did this, like, you opened the spring court to Hybern, you paved a straight path to my court, you did this, and of course Rhys got pissed, but valid. Tarquin was so valid for that. I was howling. I was like, yes. And then just the audacity that Rhys had to be like, don't tell her what to do, she's a high lady. And then Tarquin's like, don't threaten me in my own fucking court, Rhysand. And I was like, yes, Tarquin! Yes, Tarquin! I loved that so much. But you have to think, like, that's correct. Like, by opening the spring court, which is literally the entrance to Prythian, to Hybern, you are letting him at all of the courts. Like, Feyre is a war criminal. She was a war criminal just by destroying Spring, but she's even more of a war criminal for working to help the war criminal. Like, she helped Hybern invade. Ridiculous. And, we never know if Alice and her nephews survived, because remember, they moved back to Summer after helping Feyre, so it would kind of be karma to Alice for helping her do that, but in her defense, she didn't know the scope of everything happening, she didn't know Tamlin's plan, and she didn't know the full plan of Feyre's either. So I kind of get that. But, like, what if you got Alice and her nephews killed, Feyre? What then? And then, of course, we have the war itself. And the war happens. All the shit happens. Amren becomes whatever the fuck she was, and then loses her power. Blah-bitty, blah-bitty, blah. And then we have Rhys dying. But, like, let's be honest. Rhys didn't heal the cauldron for, like, the good of everyone, if that makes sense. He saved the cauldron because he's the only one that had the power to save the cauldron. Because it would have wiped out the whole world, like, including him. But not even that, like, he didn't actually have all of the power to save the cauldron himself. He had to siphon Feyre, which I thought was very interesting, because we never see him doing that to anybody else. Since when can Rhys siphon other people's powers? That was very suspicious and very, like, a very villainous power to me. But anyway, him and Feyre save the cauldron. He dies, and then, as we know, Feyre's bawling her eyes out. She then goes and begs all of the High Lords to save him the way that they saved her. And they're like, well, you know, he's already High Fae. It doesn't happen that way. And I just want to point out, like, first of all, how are they all in the same vicinity when they're all fighting this war? That didn't make sense to me, but narrative, because everyone has to be there for Feyre. But anyway, they're all there, and she's like, I don't care, try it. I don't care, try it. So they do it. They do it. They do it. And then even Baron, which, what the fuck? Like, I think at this point, he's just like, you know what? They're gonna unalive me if I don't do this, so just go, bro. And then we have Tamlin. And honestly, I don't know if I would have been as good of a person as he was in that moment. Because if someone had done that to my family and my home after all I had done was just to try to protect them, I probably would have let that bastard die. But Feyre looks up at him, she begs him, I will give you anything, and something in his eyes shifts. And I get a lot of questions of people asking me what I think that was. And there's no question about what it was. It was him remembering bleeding out from the ash dagger on the ground and begging Amarantha for Feyre's life. And this is something a lot of people get wrong as well. If you go back to ACOTAR and you read the scene, Tamlin was the third fairy in the third trial that Feyre had to stab with an ashwood dagger. Ash nullifies fairy magic. So she stabs, she notes, through layers of flesh and muscle until she hits his stone heart. Everything happens, but he can't heal because now his magic is nullified still. Even though she broke the bargain, the curse, Ashwood still nullified Tamlin. So even though he was released of the curse, he was still nullified. So he was bleeding out on the ground, begging Amarantha for her life, and he says, please, Amarantha, I'm sorry for what I said about Clythia all those years ago. Please, please, I will do anything. And so Feyre says, please, please, I will do anything, I will give you anything, please save him. So that's what flickered in his eyes. He was remembering begging for her life. And unlike Amarantha, who snapped Feyre's neck anyway because she was a villain, Tamlin wasn't going to be like that. And so, as we know, he gives his seed of power to Rhys to revive him. And apparently, he must just walk off or the war eventually ends. And that's that for now. They don't give him enough credit for saving Rhys. At all. Like, oh, it's just a decent thing to do. Okay. So riddle me this. If the roles were reversed and Tamlin was the one on the ground, with nobody begging for him, or even if somebody was begging for him, would Rhys have saved him? Because I don't think he would have. I don't think Rhys is as good as a male as Tamlin is. I just don't. Yeah, I don't think he would have saved him if the roles were reversed. But that brings me to my next point. Where the fuck was Rhys when Asriel and Feyre and Elaine and Briar were getting attacked and Asriel and Feyre's wings were getting shredded by Hybern beasts and Feyre was screaming down the bond for him? You're not going to come to help save your mate? What were you doing? Are you busy? Just like you were busy when your family got killed? Because That's giving mirrors to me, and that's making me question everything. Which, I don't think his family's dead anyway, but that's a whole other theory I'm doing. But yeah, Tamlin was the one who had to out himself as a traitor to Hybern. Finally, he did everything to prevent that, and to prevent Hybern knowing that he was a spy. He did everything to prevent that. He went as far as letting Ianthe do whatever the fuck she want, letting the twins do whatever the fuck they want, just so that he could stay a spy to help the courts with any little teeny tiny chance they had to win the war. So the fact that Tamlin outed himself as a traitor to save their lives speaks huge volumes to me. Because every time you give him a chance, he will put somebody's life above his own. Every single time. Even back to ACOTAR, like, his sentries had to beg him to try to undo the curse, because he wouldn't send them to die. So Tamlin saves Feyre and Azriel and Elaine and Briar by sending this huge, powerful wind power to help them float across the sea or whatever. And that's, I know a lot of people, like, or especially Rhys fans, like, don't really put much stock in that scene, but it is a really telling scene when you think of Tamlin's strategy and how he fucked it up just to save them. These are enemies of his court that he's outing himself to save. And, like Feyre's favorite quote, to her credit, when they are floating away across the sea, Feyre does seem, I don't know if it's like concern. I don't know if I would go so far as to say concern, because she tries to convince herself that she really doesn't care. But she looks back and she sees Tamlin, like, single-handedly fighting these dozens of Hybern beasts in his beast form. All bloody, all whatever, holding the line. And they go through the portal, like the winnowing portal, whatever the fuck they called it. I forget what they called it. And there's a split second there where she actually worries if he's going to make the jump. And that is the split second that her human heart showed again. That hadn't since the beginning of ACOMAF, that I really appreciated. I do think she's suppressed by Rhys. I don't think that Rhys is a good person. I do think he's still a villain. But that's for another time. But I did like that she was like, is he gonna make it? Like, is he gonna make it through the portal? And then he jumped further than any being should be able to jump, made it through, and then winnowed out. But that scene just, it stays with me, because he saved them. But where was Rhys? Where was he? Where was he? Where was he when Feyre was screaming down the bond, terrified for her life? When her wings and Azriel's wings were getting mauled by the Hybern beasts? Where? Where was he? Why didn't he show up? Your mate and wife and your brother are being almost killed and you don't show up? Why? Why? If you're Mr. Perfect, and she's your salvation, and you love her so much, and Azriel is your brother, why are you not showing up to help save them? Because you know that he's feeling this shit through the bond. And Feyre's like, oh, why didn't you show up? And he's like, oh, well, like, I had a lot of business to attend to. And that's more important than your mate's life, than your brother's life? Fuck off, man. That is villain behavior. Not to mention he did it before by throwing her to the Weavers and then just laughing about it when she's covered in melted flesh. It took her enemy that hates you and hates your Illyrian brothers and at this point hates Feyre to save their lives. He saved their lives and you didn't show up? Really? There's also another point I wanted to make, going back to the High Lords meeting real quick, because I forgot. But Tamlin successfully convinced Phazand, or at least Rhys, that he had always been on the court side, that this whole strategy and everything that he's done up to this point was to help with the war. After the meeting, Feyre speaks to him mind to mind, because God forbid they have a normal conversation using their voices. But anyway, they mind speak each other, and Feyre says, "Do you really believe that he's been working on our side this whole time?" And Rhys says, "Yes, perhaps we did him a disservice. Perhaps even I began thinking of him as some warrior brute." And I know this line by heart, because I have been fighting people on this point for so long at this point. And it's like, Feyre and Rhys even admitted it. So, if you're going to say, like, oh, you're making stuff up, like, just to be in defense of Tamlin, no. Your little faves, Rhys and Feyre, even said it between themselves. Okay? Okay. So yes, this was all a strategy. He was never trying to force Feyre back as his wife. It was all a plan, like, in front of Hybern, in front of Ianthe. Like, that was